This is Going Under, Anesthesia Answered with Dr. Brian Schmutzler. I'm Vahid Sadrzadeh.
And I'm Dr. Brian Schmutzler. We are sponsored by Butterfly Network. When it comes to successful ultrasound-guided procedures, precision is everything. That's why IQ3 Plus, Butterfly's handheld POCUS device, contains advanced features to support procedural success. With Butterfly's needle-out-of-plane preset, you can visualize the needle tip within 1 millimeter after insertion. Butterfly's biplane imaging, the only multi-plane imaging in a handheld ultrasound. I actually just used this the other day on a cardiac image. Lets you see both short and long axis views simultaneously in real time. And NeedleViz enhances your ability to track the needle in plane from entry point to the region of interest. Butterfly IQ3 also delivers image quality similar to a cart-based POCUS system at 1/10 the price. And unlike a cart, you can carry it with you in your pocket to conveniently use anywhere you want, when you want. So whether you're inserting IVs, performing regional anesthesia, conducting cardiac assessments, gastric evaluations, long ultrasound, or anything in between, the Butterfly IQ3 is the perfect probe for your practice. Visit store.butterflynetwork.com to claim a soft case with the purchase of an IQ3. Use code BRIAN25 at checkout. Terms apply.
I'm very excited. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be releasing a podcast with one of the innovators of the Butterfly IQ3 and really had a hand in making this POCUS device something to behold.
Yes, yeah.
And so we're really excited about that. But today we're talking about the NIH, which stands for
National Institutes of Health.
And why are we talking? They're in the news right now.
Yeah, in the news quite a bit. So we'll have to go back and explain quite a bit. But basically, the NIH funds a large majority of the basic science research and other research in the United States. And so what happens just sort of in general, and I've done this before because I have a PhD. I did basic science bench research. You come up with an idea, you submit the idea to the NIH, you tell them you want to get funded for it.
Okay.
So they pay you whatever you need to get funded to be able to finish the research. So we'll talk about sort of the nitty gritty and the details that a lot of people don't understand. But that's the basic gist. The National Institutes of Health, one of their main jobs is to fund research in academic and private institutions.
So if you're in academia, let's say you're at Harvard, and you're like, I want to study cancer research,
right?
And I want to put in $1 million,
right?
And I want to get a grant of $1 million.
Yeah.
You go to the NIH and submit that grant.
Yep.
For that money.
Yep.
Well, they announced that it would be capping
indirect costs.
Correct.
Yes.
It would be capping indirect cost payments for new and existing research grants at 15%.
Correct.
Effective February 10th. So which means what?
Yeah, so this is where the complexity comes in. So let's use that $1 million that you said. So let's say I think it's going to cost me $1 million for the staff that I need, the supplies that I need, the research stuff that I need, cells, mice, rabbits, whatever, the computers, the chairs, the rooms.
Which is a very low number, by the way.
Right. But I mean, you put all that together and you say it's roughly $1 million.
Right.
That's what I'm submitting for. Well, if I'm at Harvard, I believe their indirect cost percentage for every grant that's submitted to the NIH is 60%. So if I write a grant for $1 million, I have to say, I'm sorry, NIH, it's not $1 million. It's $1,600,000. Because the facility, the institution, takes an indirect cost for hosting you, right? So they claim it's to keep the lights on. It's to build more buildings. It's to do X, Y, and Z, right? All the things that a major academic institution would do.
It's like renting a facility, basically. It's the cost.
Yeah.
It's the cost to rent it or do whatever, right?
But it's not tied to anything. So when I write the grant for my direct cost, that's tied to something. If I say I'm paying a lab technician $50,000, I pay the lab technician $50,000. That $600,000 just goes into a fund somewhere.
Right.
And the institution can do whatever they want with it. Here's the other problem. So Harvard might be 60%, but IU, and I can't remember the last NIH grant I wrote was a long time ago, but maybe IU is 20%. So why is there a disparity? Why does Harvard need? Is it 3 times more expensive for Harvard to support me
for you to do that?
Indiana University? Probably not, right? And what you find when you look at indirect cost percentages, they're set by the institution, not by the NIH, right? So Harvard sets theirs at 60%. Why? Because they're Harvard and they can. I mean, I don't think that there's anything inherently more expensive about Harvard. I mean, maybe 10, 20% if you're talking about, East Coast versus Midwest, but it's not 3 times more expensive for Harvard to support me than Indiana. So why do they do that? Because they're Harvard.
Because they can.
Because they can, right? And so I guess what happened was that the Trump administration, agree or disagree, said we are capping indirect costs at 15%. That's what we as an administration believe that it costs to support research.
So Harvard now can only charge 15%.
Correct. So what's everybody going to do, right? So there's a few things that can happen. Probably the easiest thing is that Harvard says, oh, darn, we don't get $600,000 on every million anymore. We get $150,000. We make it work. Is that going to happen? I doubt it. So I'm guessing, I have no independent knowledge of this because I don't write grants anymore. I'm guessing that they're going to write grants for higher amounts so that Harvard can get that 60%, right? So if it was $1 million and your indirect costs now are only 15%,
so that 15% goes up,
right? Well, you're gonna increase it from $1 million to 1.4 or whatever, so that your 15% of 1.4 ends up matching the same amount.
And why are they doing this?
So I mean, this just goes back to the whole idea of waste and bloat, right? You would assume, again, because of the huge disparity in some places are 15, 20, some places are 60, the huge disparity, there's something going on where that money's not necessarily getting used for what it's used for. Now, agree or disagree, this is sort of a blunt cut. This is not a precision cut, right? It's not like the NIH is going into Harvard specifically and saying, let me see where that $600,000 is going. It's just a big, broad announcement of everybody's going down to 15%. Let's see what happens. So, again, agree or disagree. I'm not making a political statement here. I'm just arguing the point of what are they doing, explaining this is what they're doing. This is how it works. I'd also like to even back up further. So NIH funding is interesting. So depending on the administration, depending on the economy, it goes up and down. And so they fund at a percentage, right? So you submit a grant, and I've done this before. So being an MD, PhD, I've written my own grants, submitted them. I was right on the funding line in 2008 or 9 or whatever year it was. I was there 7. Didn't quite get funded, but I was right on the funding line. So if you look back to, let's say, the Clinton administration in the early 90s, the United States was flush with cash. We had a balanced budget, and the Clinton administration made research a priority, right? So they were funding at around 30%. So that means 1 in every 3 grants that got submitted got funded.
Okay.
Just my opinion, there's probably not 33% of research that's worthwhile doing, right? That number's probably too high, okay? When I started submitting grants, the percentage of grants being funded was under 10%, like maybe 8%, okay? So do we think 1 in every 12 grants is worth funding? That's probably a little too low, right? So there's probably an area in the middle where we should be funding maybe 12 to 15%.
Do these universities or places, I mean, can you not ask them for grants either?
You can. There's some internal grants, but a huge percentage comes from the NIH because the NIH is so large and has so much money. Yeah. So I funded my research through a private organization. We did research on neurofibromatosis. So I submitted my grants to the Children's Tumor Foundation, which was the private organization funding neurofibromatosis. So there's lots of private grants out there. Now, you could argue you get into some issues, probably not with the Children's Tumor Foundation, which is a small committed to treating neurofibromatosis. But if you say take money from a pharmaceutical company for a grant, there's probably some pressure on you to, not that anybody is doing anything nefarious, but there's certainly pressure on you to publish things that are in the benefit of that pharmaceutical company. Same thing for a medical device company. Same thing for any of these companies who have a product to sell, right? So again, you could argue on that side of it that if you take more private grant money, you're likely to get more intentionally or unintentionally biased research. So I think that's what a lot of people are arguing about. And I'm a huge proponent of the NIH in terms of funding research, right? I did a PhD. I believe in independent, peer-reviewed research. I also think there's probably waste and abuse in the NIH funding system.
So what do you think happens from here now? I mean, the judge extends the order blocking, right?
Yeah,
so now,
I think there's an injunction in a few states.
22 I think 22 states it said, at least temporarily.
So I think a lot of these executive orders, not just this one, but a lot of them are probably going to end up at the Supreme Court. I don't know how you can argue. I don't know how you can argue that 60% is the right number, or really, how do you argue that each independent facility or institution gets to decide, right?
Right.
My proposal, and I said this from 20 years ago when I started doing research, you should make indirect costs line up the same way that direct costs do. So if Harvard says I need 60%, I need $600,000 on your $1 million grant, I want to see where that money's going.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? I think transparency is probably better than just cutting
If you're the
funds.
research, wouldn't you want to see where that money goes?
Right, exactly. So Harvard should have to account for that $600,000 to the NIH, and it should be directly related to research funding, not going into some coffer somewhere, right? And
that's
And to the same degree, maybe 15% isn't enough. Maybe Indiana University is charging 20%. They're really spending 25%. I think the NIH then should go back and fund the additional 5%. If you can show that money is going to where it should.
And this is why universities like the University of Notre Dame perhaps want to see more research, because they're getting funding.
Yep, there is a financial advantage to that. Now, I do think the majority of universities actually do care about good research.
100%.
Right?
Yeah, I believe that totally.
But there is also a financial incentive. Right?
There's got to be a financial incentive to this.
Yep.
We just don't host football games on Saturdays because they're fun and because it's tradition.
Right.
They make money.
They make a lot of money. Yeah, exactly.
And there's a reason that that COVID hurt,
Yep.
a lot of these universities, because people couldn't come on campus to get the experience.
Yep.
All that to say, there is a financial benefit to what these institutions do, and it's in their best financial interest to, get these grants from the NIH.
Right. And so, I don't think that it's an issue to have transparency.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing is let's see where this money is going. And if you actually need it, Harvard, Yale, Indiana, whatever, let's give it to you.
Yeah.
But if it's just going to pad your bottom line, is that really what taxpayer money funding research should be doing?
Right.
Going into the endowment at Harvard. Now, and again, I am not accusing Harvard of doing anything. I did not say that they're putting it in their endowment. I'm just saying we should be able to see where that money's going.
All right. This has been a very riveting 15-minute episode of Going Under Anesthesia Answered. We can't keep it under 20.
I don't know.
It's like going into Target and not spending $60.
Or Costco. Costco and not
Good
spending
luck with
$400
on eggs.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
This has been Going Under Anesthesia Answered with Dr. Brian Schmutzler. I'm Vahid Sadarzadeh. We are brought to you by the Butterfly Network, and we'll see you in the next one.